All right, so we're back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be taking a look at this Newsweek report that's been making the rounds.
Hmm.
It's about, this meeting between former President Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau
Yeah.
at Mar-a-Lago, just a few weeks after the 2024 U.S. election.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting that Trudeau chose to meet Trump there.
Yeah.
He was actually the first G7 leader to do so after the election.
Right. And get this, apparently during the meeting, Trump just casually suggested that Canada should just become like the 51st state.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Really?
It's kind of wild,
Er,
which is why we're going to break this whole thing down.
I think that the fact that he chose Mar-a-Lago as the venue also adds another layer of intrigue to it.
Yeah.
Because it's where Trump often hosts these high-stakes meetings.
Right.
And it kind of blurs the line between official diplomacy and, I don't know what to call it,
Yeah.
Trumpian showmanship.
Yeah. It's like, come on over to my private club. Let's talk about global affairs.
All right.
But it's important to remember that this meeting took place when Trump was threatening to put a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico.
Right. And that threat was related to Trump's campaign promises to reduce migration and drug trafficking into the U.S.
Right.
But you have to think about the economic ramifications of that kind of tariff,
Yeah.
especially for Canada.
Huge. I mean, Canada's economy is super intertwined with ours.
Yeah,
75% of their exports go to the U.S.
exactly.
And we currently have the USMCA, which, keeps trade mostly duty-free.
Right.
A 25% tariff would be.
Yeah, it'd be massive.
Yeah.
It could be devastating to certain sectors of the Canadian economy,
Yeah, for sure.
especially ones that rely on exporting goods to the U.S.
Right.
And we've seen similar trade disputes escalate in the past,
Mhm.
leading to economic downturns and, prolonged tensions.
So in the middle of all this tension, Trump just drops this 51st state bombshell.
Wow.
Here's the direct quote from a Fox News report citing unnamed sources. Trump said, if Canada can't survive without ripping off the U.S. to the tune of $100 billion a year, maybe you guys should just become the 51st state and you can be the governor.
Wow. The language is striking,
Yeah,
especially because it almost seems like a throwaway line,
right.
but the implications are huge.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if it was a real proposal,
Yeah.
a power move, or just a bad joke.
And was he serious, or
I don't know.
what was he even trying to achieve with a comment like that?
It's really hard to say for sure, but it definitely reveals a lot about Trump's approach to diplomacy.
Yeah.
Even if it was a joke, it undermines the seriousness of the whole situation.
Yeah.
And risks escalating tensions further.
Right.
International relations require a certain level of decorum
Sure.
and respect.
Yeah,
And this just kind of flies in the face of that.
for sure. And of course, the internet just exploded.
I bet.
The Reddit threads were just a whirlwind of disbelief, humor,
Yeah.
and some genuine concern.
It's amazing how these reactions show the different perspectives on this complex issue.
Totally.
You had some Canadians who absolutely rejected the idea,
Right.
others who saw it as a joke, albeit an unsettling one.
Yeah.
And then you have Americans suggesting that blue states should join Canada.
A reverse Uno.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how this off-the-cuff remark brought all these underlying currents of national identity and political division to the surface.
It's true. It reminds us that even these lighthearted comments can tap into these deeply held beliefs and anxieties.
So we have this outlandish comment from Trump, this tense backdrop of trade threats, and a flurry of reactions online.
That's a lot.
This is about more than just a joke, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I think this incident shows some deep-seated tensions in U.S. Canada relations and points to a much larger conversation about trade wars, global power dynamics, and the future of the world order.
Yeah, this is heavy stuff.
It is.
What really stood out to you the most about this whole 51st state thing?
What's fascinating to me is how this incident has shown the vulnerabilities of this seemingly strong relationship.
Yeah,
I think we often take our alliance with Canada for granted,
for sure.
but this situation has really brought to the surface a lot of these unspoken anxieties and resentments.
It's like we're seeing these cracks in the foundation, and it raises some serious questions about the future.
Exactly. And to really understand those potential implications, I think we need to step back and look at the wider context of global trade and shifting power dynamics.
Okay, so listeners get ready, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore the bigger picture.
Yes.
We'll examine Trump's broader trade policies, the rise of the BRICS nations, and what it all means for the future of U.S.-Canada relations and the world.
It's a lot to cover.
It is, so stay tuned.
So welcome back. And before we go too far into the wider context, I think it's important to remember that, this whole 51st state suggestion, even if it was just, like a joke, it really touches upon this sensitive issue of Canada's national identity.
It's not just about economics, right? I mean, Canadians seem pretty happy with their own system. They have universal health care, a strong social safety net.
Yeah.
Those are some pretty big differences.
Exactly. And I think this whole thing has really sparked this conversation in Canada about their economic reliance on the U.S.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you see all these discussions about diversifying their trade, exploring new markets, and really investing in Canadian innovation.
It's like a wake-up call,
Right.
Time to rethink their place in the world.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about like the broader context here. Trump's trade policies, the rise of the BRICS nations.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, I think, Trump's America First agenda has really shaken things up globally.
Yeah.
His willingness to use tariffs, it's created uncertainty and tension, not just with Canada and Mexico, but with other major economies.
Right, which brings us to the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates.
It's a mouthful.
It is, and Trump has threatened them with like 100% tariffs if they create a rival currency to the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
Can you explain what's going on there?
So it's basically this power struggle
Okay.
over control of the global financial system.
Right.
The U.S. dollar has been the dominant currency for international trade for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's given the U.S., a lot of economic and political power.
So what are the BRICS nations trying to do?
Well, they want to reduce their reliance on the U.S. dollar,
Okay.
create a more multipolar world
Okay.
where, economic power is distributed more evenly.
Got it. And how does the U.S. feel about all of this?
Not great.
Not great.
They see this as a direct challenge to their, global dominance.
Right.
And they're responding with threats and economic pressure.
So we've got the U.S. trying to hold on to its power, the BRICS nations pushing back, and Canada stuck in the middle.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation.
How does this all connect back to the U.S.-Canada relationship?
Well, it shows that U.S.-Canada relations aren't isolated. They're influenced by these global trends.
Right.
As the world order changes, traditional alliances are being tested.
Yeah.
We're seeing this resurgence of nationalism and protectionism.
So what does all of this mean for the future of U.S.-Canada relations?
Right. Are we heading towards a trade war?
Yeah. Is this a blip on the radar?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But this incident is a pretty clear indication that the relationship is at a crossroads.
Okay. And what's going to determine which path we take?
I think it depends on, the willingness of both countries to talk openly and honestly, to acknowledge each other's concerns.
Yeah.
And to find ways to cooperate despite their differences.
It sounds like we need like a more mature and nuanced approach to diplomacy,
Right.
one that recognizes the complexities of the world today. Yeah.
But in this age of social media and 24/7 news, can we even have these kinds of conversations?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, this constant barrage of information.
Yeah.
It's often sensationalized and polarized, makes it really hard to have, these thoughtful discussions
Right.
about these complex issues.
Yeah.
But I think it's precisely because of all this information overload that we need these spaces, like this deep dive,
Yeah.
where we can step back, analyze the information, and consider multiple perspectives.
It's about resisting the urge to oversimplify and instead embracing the complexity.
Exactly. And I think there's another layer to this story, too.
Right.
The human element.
Right.
I mean, behind all the politics and economics, there are real people, whose lives are being impacted.
What would you say to our listeners who are feeling overwhelmed by all of this?
Don't panic.
Yeah.
I think it's natural to feel that way when you're confronted with so much information.
Right.
The key is to be discerning about the information you consume. Okay.
Look for different perspectives and think critically.
So it's about being active in how we engage with information, not just passive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value.
Yeah.
Question assumptions, challenge biases,
Right.
and look for evidence.
That's great advice. And it's also important to remember that we're not powerless.
Right.
We can make our voices heard,
Absolutely.
get involved in our communities,
Yeah.
hold our leaders accountable.
Change happens from the ground up.
Yeah,
The more informed and engaged we are,
right.
the better equipped we'll be to shape the future.
Those are some really powerful words to think about as we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Hmm.
We've covered a lot,
Right.
from the U.S. Canada situation to global trade and power dynamics,
Yeah.
but the story's not over.
Right.
In the final part, we'll explore potential futures for U.S. Canada relations and what it all means for the global order.
Stay tuned for the final leg of our journey.
All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've explored the whole, Trump-Trudeau 51st state thing, the trade tensions, the global power dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look ahead. What are the potential futures for the U.S.-Canada relationship?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that this incident, as strange as it seemed at first,
Yeah.
it really forced both sides to reevaluate the relationship.
Yeah, and I noticed that a lot of the initial reaction was focused on Trump himself,
Right,
his
yeah.
style, his unpredictability.
Yeah.
But beyond all that, this really revealed some deeper issues.
Yeah, there's a feeling in Canada and maybe in other countries too that the U.S. just takes its partnerships for granted.
Mm,
Remember that quote from Trudeau a few years back about living next to the U.S. being like sleeping with an elephant?
right.
Every twitch and grunt can have huge consequences.
And this whole 51st state comment and the tariff threats, that was like a pretty big twitch and grunt.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what's interesting. Instead of just giving in to the pressure, Canada seems to be responding with this renewed sense of national pride.
Yeah.
Like they're ready to chart their own course.
I'm seeing that too. There's talk of diversifying their economy,
Right.
strengthening ties with other countries,
Mhm.
investing in Canadian innovation. It's like this whole thing was a wake-up call for them.
Yeah, and on the U.S. side, I think there's a growing awareness of how important Canada is as an ally,
Right.
a trading partner, a source of stability in the world.
So maybe this 51st state thing will actually be a good thing in the end.
Possibly. It could be a wake-up call that forces both countries to really look at the relationship and build something stronger.
That brings us to the bigger question of what does all of this tell us about the future of the global order?
Right.
We talked about the BRICS nations, the shifting power dynamics, the potential for conflict.
It's a lot.
It is.
But I think this incident highlights something really important.
Okay.
We're living in an increasingly interconnected world. Isolationism just isn't an option anymore.
Right.
The challenges we face, climate change, economic instability, technology, all of it, it requires us to work together.
So instead of retreating into our own corners, we need to find ways to work together.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in mindset,
Yeah.
a willingness to listen to each other and find common ground even when we disagree.
That sounds tough, especially with the way things are right now.
It is, but I do see some hope.
Okay.
The challenges are big, but we can overcome them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this incident, as crazy as it was, will remind us of what's really important.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this question. What role will you play in shaping the future?
Will you embrace the complexity and try to find common ground, or will you retreat into fear and division?
The choice is yours.
But remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us.
Right.
We create it together.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this deep dive gave you some new insights, maybe even sparked some new questions. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep engaging with the world until next time. Stay curious,